This Final Cut Pro 10 Tour presentation is brought to you by the LumaForge Share Station, the world's best storage for Final Cut 10. For more information on how the Share Station can improve your workflow, head on over to lumaforge.com.
I'm very grateful to be invited here to talk about VR. It's something that I've been working in all this year. And I'm already a Final Cut Pro 10 editor. I have been for about the last 3 years, so I'm very comfortable in that environment. Firstly, the VR that I work in is with a company called Jaunt, who many of you may know. I'm assuming you do. Jaunt are a company that both have developed a very sophisticated VR camera that is VR stereo, has 24 lenses, and they are they're a company that also produces the final output, the stitch, if you like. They produce the footage, which is actually the difficult part. From time to time, I'm getting asked by people, what are the rules of editing virtual reality? You know, and people always like to have rules anyway. I mean, they like to have some sort of framework. And the only rule that I can come up with, and like I say, I keep getting asked this, is you have to have the headset. You have to have the ability to review the footage in the environment you're expecting to display it in. I know that I've seen reports of people, you know, I used to think that I could edit it without the headset. I thought, I'll imagine I'm just going to look at the central part of the screen. It just doesn't work. So in terms of the rules, there aren't any rules as long as you're looking. If you're not looking, then you're kind of screwed. Do you know what I mean? You'll never know what the rules are because you won't be able to work out whether it's working or not. And it's a different art form. You can't make people look at a specific place. You can ask them to, you can goad them to look in a particular direction, and you can present them with several pieces of information at the same time. But you can't, in the way that you would do with normal cinema, you can't present a juxtaposition of shots by doing, you know, a shot and then a jump cut to another shot and then a jump cut to another shot. You can't present that as a juxtaposition. You have to put the juxtaposition in different parts of the environment if you want to do that sort of thing. But that's a freedom, in fact. I mean, that's not necessarily a drawback, I don't think. But certainly, I feel that viewing this footage we have to use the Oculus DK2. It's actually an obsolete system, but the headset that we use is the DK2, and we use Tim Dashwood's excellent set of plugins and software support to allow us to view in an editorial setting what we're doing inside the set. So you'll make some changes, you'll put the cut together, and you'll stick the thing on. We'll have a little review, and then carry on and make some more changes. So that's that. Many aspects of VR are very similar to the old way of working about 10 years ago, I suppose, and people still do this now. It's an offline-online paradigm in a sense that you can work with lower quality dailies and lower quality footage, and then at the end of the job, you're intending to do a conform or find some way of replacing the lower quality footage with high quality footage. I think if I pull up, okay, so this is an example of the lower quality footage from the Paul McCartney job. And then if I just snap to the higher quality one, that's what came out of this camera when rendered it. The reason there's a black slab in there is because the DIT lost lost or recorded over one of the cards. So, and I'm only showing you this to demonstrate that you get your footage in two different formats. You get this low quality version, which is that one, if you can just see up in the corner. And the algorithm will fill in the gap. And you don't know that you've got a problem with your footage until you order up the high quality thing and find out that there's a missing panel. So that's something to watch out for. There's a lot of gotchas in VR, and that is one of them, is that you won't necessarily find a production problem until you see some of your high quality footage. So it's worth bearing that in mind. It's one of the things that is that's something to keep an eye on. Working on the Paul McCartney project with Tony Kaye. I don't know if any of you know Tony Kaye or know what he's like, but he's a very famous commercials director, has been for a long time in the UK and in the States. And Tony likes to try a lot of stuff, right? I mean, that's just a given. He's a director, a lot of directors are like this. They're going to want to try a lot of different ideas. And it's one of the reasons why I like Final Cut is because I'm able to try a lot of this stuff, the crazy stuff. You know, I can't really give you any particular examples, but you can imagine, you know, whatever a director will come up with, he might shoot something on his phone and want to see that over Paul McCartney's face, or on that blue screen, or put up some stills, or put up all sorts of bits of footage, or anything at all. You need to be able to respond to those kind of creative impulses quickly, I think. And part of the reason why I like this Final Cut Pro system and the way it works is it allows me to do that. It will play back relatively fast. It doesn't need a lot of rendering. It's because of the way that it allows you to use compound clips, you can make changes very quickly. You can reorder the cut. You can stretch and shrink stuff around. You can do a lot of stuff. So that for me was very important. We did this project. When we started, Tony reviewed all the dailies. He basically just went and interviewed Paul McCartney, and came back with a narrative from that interview, which basically, on most of the cases, was Paul talking about the way he wrote the songs and then the way they made the videos. That was kind of a way that boiled down. So that just means that there's a lot of work involved in manipulating lots of bits of media. You know, there's going to be lots of stills coming in. We had lots of archive stills. We had lots of stuff from Paul McCartney's company. We had lots of old music videos that were various different formats. They were 4:3. They were, again, different frame rates. So there's a lot of different pieces of information going into the editorial system and needing to come out in a decent, viewable fashion. What he had with Paul, he was very keen to have a very specific design idea. He has a designer, a guy called Alex Kohnke, German guy who lives in San Diego. And Alex would come up with and would provide us with artwork like this for us to use and manipulate in Final Cut Pro in a VR sense. Now, I'm just talking about My Valentine today. And one of the things that came out of the interview with Paul about My Valentine was that it was a film job. He shot it on a 35mm camera with Wally Pfister. So Tony picked up on this idea of film, wanted the whole project to be about film. Whilst we were thinking about that sort of thing, I used to be a film editor a long time ago, and I remember watching film go into a moviola. I used to think that was quite a compelling sort of view, that sort of film strip of Paul McCartney there is the sort of thing that would go on. But essentially, these are just like, this is just design stuff that our designer gave us to work with. We would then do our best to try and make that work in a VR environment. Now, obviously, when you're in VR, inside the goggles, you're actually only seeing this kind of area. So it becomes a very immersive sort of world where you can look around and maybe you're seeing the sea down here, or you're seeing Natalie Portman up here, or you're seeing Paul McCartney up there. We tried very hard to be honest and true to the designer's intentions inside the VR world, because it was something that we felt was very important. When we tried to enact on those things, we would come up with stuff like this, which would be... this is kind of some examples of the work that we put together. It was very much it was almost like found media. We'd pull frames from the video, we'd send them to Alex, he'd photocopy them, maybe paint over them, or we'd find stuff on the internet. In the background, you can see this is Natalie Portman and Johnny Depp in Paul McCartney's video for My Valentine, which we use as an element. We would be, as much as we could, trying to blend the media together. I mean, I personally like all this kind of handmade art stuff, you know, with bits of you can see the water drops, and you can almost feel the texture of the water. We were trying very hard to make something that was unseen in the VR world up till that point. We submitted this. We're very, very happy with it. But ultimately, Paul McCartney wasn't a big fan of it. You know, it was his choice. He was the artist. You know, he didn't really want to go down that route. So we then had to rethink our strategy. And I probably jumped ahead a little bit. One of the reasons that this came up was because we had an interview with Paul that was shot on the Red camera. Even though this was a VR shoot, Tony took a Red camera with him. And he just had a very good interview on the Red camera. So we then had to think of a way that we could make that work inside VR. So that's how we got to the film strip idea. I probably jumped ahead a little bit too far there. So having got to a point where we'd had a story that we loved that was about Paul McCartney writing the song My Valentine for his new wife, and then telling us the story of making his video on film. We wanted to try and retain some of those elements, but we realised that we couldn't. It took like 5 or 6 weeks to do this job. It was a lot of work involved in it. We just basically had to sort of throw that away and look at what other takes that we had. One of the takes that we did have, where Paul was talking about the same stuff in a very similar way, was the take that I showed you with the broken take. So we knew that we couldn't use this take. It would have been too expensive to even though it doesn't seem like a very big deal, just filling in that black gap. Actually, it is, just because there's a lot of stereo going on. There's different. There's different bits of depth here with the guitars and things like that. It turned out to be, it was going to be very expensive for us to change that. So what we opted to do was, given that we liked the way that Paul delivered his discussion in that moment, and given that we also had a take of Paul playing his Wurlitzer, and from our point of view, we sort of felt like, well, how can we not use this? It's a great piece of, it's kind of fan, it's something great for the fans, right? I mean, we all like Paul McCartney, and we just thought it was quite a charming little thing. There's Tony sort of getting his cameras ready. So the solution that we came up with, the Jaunt camera has, like I said, 24 lenses, which are all on their sides. We were able to pull this camera as an individual piece of media, and use that to build this take, which kept us honest with our little filmy idea, because we like that. Paul's standing there, he's actually talking, but we can't use that in stereo. But what we wanted to do was use that and then basically put that on top of this background take of Paul playing the Wurlitzer. So essentially, the fact that we were able to use these plugins to add in parts of the edit after the fact was a game changer from our point of view. We were able to, like I say, build this environment, which is now, this is the version 2 of the job, but it's the same thing. Paul McCartney is still talking about the same story. He's still talking about making the film and shooting it on film, and talking about Natalie Portman, and talking about doing sign language, and talking about Johnny Depp. And in the background, we've got Paul McCartney sitting at his little Wurlitzer organ, quite happily playing away. And it became a kind of immersive thing. You're back in the room, you feel like you're in Paul McCartney's space again, and yet he's still giving you a dissertation in front of you that is that is compelling, even though it's not, Paul McCartney in the centre isn't of himself in 3D. It's in a 3D space, but he's not in 3D. So that was, for us, a huge advantage. It meant that we were able to finish the job, essentially. The other thing that came up with this project is that Paul McCartney, when he originally made his video for this job, was, which is, like I said, it's called My Valentine, it featured Natalie Portman and Johnny Depp doing sign language to the song. It was quite a nice little piece. It's black and white. It was shot on film, like I say, with a sort of Irving Penn backdrop. When they did it, they did a main video that was cutting between Natalie and Johnny. And then they did another version, or 2 other versions. It didn't get a lot of airplay, but they did one that was just Natalie Portman as a single take, doing the whole thing through, doing her sign language all the way through. And obviously another one just with Johnny Depp doing his thing. And there's a moment where he plays the guitar. So it seemed an obvious thing for us to try and present those 3 things in one virtual reality space. It's actually a kind of more useful use of 3 synchronized videos than you would get by watching them one after another. I mean, it was a really nice part of being able to go into VR for us. So what we ended up doing was synchronizing these 3 videos, and the synchronization, actually they cheated a little bit when they made the cuts. It doesn't quite, it's not perfectly in sync, and they had different frame rates. We managed to get everything back into its correct sync for the music, and eventually built this version of the video, which if you were watching inside the headset, you feel like you're inside a triangular room where you've got a big screen in front of you where you've got this image, and then one to the side of you here where you've got this image, and then another one here where you've got Natalie, and you can, as a viewer, you're making the edits. And I think in a way that this is one of the things I think where I read an article by Steven Spielberg saying, oh, you can't kind of control what people are thinking, and as a filmmaker you can't control people. I think that when you give the viewer some sort of agency or some ability to make their own decisions, they start getting invested in the whole procedure much more. And I think it's a more I think it's certainly equally compelling. I wouldn't say I can't really sort of comment on whether somebody likes somebody more or less, but certainly as it's almost analogous to an art installation. It's like going into an art gallery where you're just presented with 3 screens around. You never normally get this in your normal viewing world. We all look out to the screen in front of us. You're never inside the action. So one of the things I think is very interesting about VR is you can put the camera in, you can put it on the stage. You can put it next to the president whilst he's being sworn in. I think that the usage of the camera is not to put it where the audience sit. The usage of the camera is to put it inside the action or inside places I can't go. I want to be inside a nuclear reactor, or I want to be inside a volcano, or, like I said, inside the inauguration of the president. And in this case, you're inside the 3 videos. I mean, it's a kind of a nice and, for us, an interesting space to develop. Everybody gets caught up with the technology. Everybody kind of gets very kind of involved with, like, oh, right, we can do this special trick, or we can do this other thing. The story is everything with all these things. The narrative drove this piece completely. And then once we had the narrative, the design drove what we were trying to do. And then our job was to try and allow the artists and the original story to come out in the VR world. That was our job as editors. I think it's too easy for people to get caught up in just going, oh, well, it's just VR. It's enough that it's VR. I don't think it is enough that it's VR. I think it has to be a creative procedure and a creative process, and you have to really try and push the art form forwards. I mean, it's almost like with the beginning of film again. There's I forget the French director, but the one of the first science fiction film with the moon with a shell in it. Okay, we're at that era of cinematography and filmmaking again, where people aren't quite up to speed yet with what we can do, and again, with the kinds of effects that we can do, the Dashwood plugins allow us to put objects into this 3D space. But in addition to that, just with the background footage, if you imagine without the overlays, just this room. There's things that you can do in this space editorially, and there's things you can't do. It's quite difficult to do, to do the sort of things that we'd normally do, painting outlines or painting out bits of objects, or doing power windows to take out bits of blue screen reflection in the chrome and stuff like that. That can be quite a challenge. But you can do quite simple effects, the sort of editorial tricks that people would have used in feature films quite happily in the 70s and the 60s, just jump cutting to, if you see a couple kind of like hammering down a highway in a fast car, and then you just jump cut to a huge explosion on the horizon. I mean, that sort of technique works really well in VR. You don't need to, we've kind of got into this world where now you have to see inside the car whilst it explodes. And I think that, if you go back a little way and start thinking about simpler editorial techniques that are more based on the storytelling, rather than actually having to hammer into people, this is exactly what everything looks like, that sort of thing becomes available. So cuts, soft edge wipes, things that work throughout the whole vertical plane, because you don't want to be having stereo mismatches if you've got things not quite lining up. But that's something that I found was useful to me. It's just like stepping back a little bit and thinking about the way that films used to be made. And I think there's one more thing I was going to say, which is in terms of the actual technical finishing of these things. We found that utilizing Final Cut's roles-based system was a massive, massive help for us. I didn't even used to know that you could do separate roles outputs for the video. I thought it was just an audio thing. I don't know if anybody else does this all the time, but my assistant, Brian Zwiner, did point it out to me. He said, no, you just set these things up as an overlay or a black and white layer or title layer. We had lots of go-rounds with the clients on this. It meant that we would send things out to be colored in Scratch a lot, or we'd have to do just lots of different outputs as separate layers for various different reasons. And the ability to just continually pump out another set of 4, stems, if you like, they're like video stems, without really having to worry about it and redo it and reset it up or make a special cut. That was a big help for us. That was worth bearing in mind. And I think that's about it, really. I haven't really got an awful lot more to say. I was going to do a little demo of Tim's plugin, but to be honest, it's a plugin with some sliders. Again, I can't really show you too much just on the screen without giving it to you in the goggles. Essentially, with stereo VR, your main problems are to do with depth perception. You don't want things clashing. You don't want an object that feels like it's in front of an object that's also in like paradoxical situations, if you like. That's something that, again, you can only really, really work out once you've got the goggles on your head, or you're using Tim's tools that help you do that. So the important part of I think that what we tried to do was the creativity. Was trying to get the most interesting virtual reality things out of Paul McCartney, given that basically they went and shot him for 2.5 hours and he just stood there and talked for a little bit. You know what I mean? Once you've got over that, and that's quite a nice thing. I mean, I could watch that all day anyway, but once you've got over that, you start getting into a situation where you want to put more information around the star, and that's what we tried to do. We tried to make it so that it didn't matter if you weren't looking in the right place, because there was always something where you were looking. Or somewhere in the room there was something for you to look at, and then you could look at it again. You could look at it 3 or 4 times and get a different experience. So that was what we tried to do with the Paul McCartney project.
Okay.
That's it.
Thank you, Duncan. Give a hand.